Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this week. We have Callie. Is it Rojewski? Rojewski?
Yeah, Callie Rojewski. Yeah, you got it right. I always say that's like my built-in icebreaker because it's spelled like Callie Rojewski. Actually, I actually always say to my parents, "Why? Why'd you do that? Why'd you spell it that way?" No, just kidding. But yeah, Callie Rojewski.
And she's going to be talking about strategy, building your CMA strategy, and basically kind of selling it up to leadership. So I'm really excited to have her. And Kaylee, um, thank you for coming. And, our I would say format is kind of like you can share whatever you brought to share, whether that's a presentation or you just have some points you want to share. And the community tends to just jump in and ask questions, raise their hand, interrupt, things like that. And I'll watch the chat for you. So go
Thank
ahead.
you. Yeah,
Sure.
I really appreciate it. It's so good to meet you all and see everyone here. I would be really interested to hear whether you want to drop it in the chat or share it at first. What questions that you have around this topic or what you'd be interested to learn, like what brings you here today. I was a former director of customer advocacy and marketing, and then I also serve as a chief strategy officer now in my role. So I did put together some slides that we can walk through, and these slides are meant to discuss like what the fundamentals are of strategic thinking and how to bring that to your teams and how to lead. And then I figured once we hear where everybody's at, if we want to go deeper into customer marketing and advocacy strategy specifically, we can really dive into details there. So does anybody want to share or drop in the chat like what questions you may have or what brings you here today?
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I am new to this series. I have had it on my calendar and haven't been able to attend, so I'm so happy to be here. Um, I am a voice of customer program manager and oversee all of our advocacy. My personal questions would be around, well, the strategy piece, but um, how to sell this to the internal folks so that they can truly see the benefit. Because I think that I've been doing in this role, started it 2 years ago, and I think that people are starting to see some of the benefit, but it's like bottom of the barrel, they forget. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's like, you know, they need something and oh, well, maybe Stephanie can help. But anyway, so I would love to, that's the piece that I would love to know. I would love to hear, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about the strategy piece of it. But really it's that internal buy-in.
Right. And then it's like people are like, have we thought about this? Does it even exist? And you're like, oh, it's actually fully baked and been operationalized for six
Been trying
months.
to tell you all about it if you just
Yeah.
pay attention.
Let me introduce you. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a big one. Um, Anybody else share that or with what's going on in your org, similar buy-in piece is a big thing and just want to learn in general?
Yeah, I think buy-in and even maybe a little bit of documentation um, is
Yeah.
helpful because I feel like a lot of people are shooting from the hip. So um, maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, that'd be great. And
Yeah.
Renee says she's here to learn. Julie Newmeister, if I said that right, she said she is here to learn and get inspired. And Julie does a really great job of implementing lots of the things she learned and coming back and sharing. So um, keep that in mind
Great.
if you ever want to get feedback.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I can kick things off. I have both of those elements in my slides. We can start there. Um, and the frameworks piece is like such a big deal. How do you have structure to that? So I think, Mary, if you can pass me screen sharing, I think that'll be the best place to start.
Done.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go to the beginning slide. Okay. All right, so we're here to talk about strategy today. And like I said, I'm going to talk at a higher level, and then we will get into the details for customer marketing and advocacy strategy specifically within your orgs. Today, we're going to learn how you can, really work through the fundamentals of strategic thinking. We're going to go over a framework for documenting your strategy and why it's really valuable to have that framework, use it frequently, and stand by it. And then we're going to go over those leadership techniques you can do to drive your strategy forward. Make sure everybody's on the same page and bought in, and also make sure it gets visibility, that it doesn't get buried and it isn't top of mind, especially for execs and leaders who need to align their budgets to your strategy. So to get into it first, my name's Callie. I've been following Mary's work in the community for a while. This is the first meetup I'm at this summer though. And that's because recently this year, I've gone full-time with a nonprofit called Cyber Collective. I'm the chief strategy officer there, and me and my partner have been working on Cyber Collective, bringing it up from its baby stage. And Cyber Collective exists to help people understand the impact of technology so that they can protect themselves online, focused on digital safety, privacy, and tech ethics. And so being a chief strategy officer, especially at this stage in business, has been quite a doozy. And I have really pulled from all of the strategies and all of the learnings that I had in my former roles. As I mentioned, I was formerly a director of customer advocacy and marketing. And then I've worked across industries, growing public awareness and working with brand advocates. Before my last role as director of customer advocacy in the cybersecurity industry, I worked for a company that's a knowledge wiki, and that product supported internal collaboration and like internal enablement. So the whole, the whole strategy that goes into helping your coworkers understand what's going on, why they should participate, and how you document that is a big part of the foundation that I bring. And I love the tech industry plus people. It's what I'm really about, tech, social impact. And then I also am a creator. I love exploring life online and IRL, right, in real life. And so I create content just about those types of concepts and how it can really help people connect online and IRL. And then I also offer my own strategy services and marketing services. So I think the first place to start is to actually define what a strategy is. There's going to be different purposes for different types of strategy, but when you think about a strategy, it's a plan of action that speaks to how you're going to focus and achieve your goals. What does success look like, and what is your plan to get there? And there are many different layers of a strategy, right? You have a whole entire business strategy, your company's goals, your company's OKRs, and then each department within that has different strategies. You can even have a strategy, or for example, you have a strategy for your whole customer advocacy program, and then you have a strategy for a specific event that you do, what the event's going to be about, like what those details look like. There's frameworks for all of that. You're setting things up as like, this is the plan, this is what's going to happen by the end of it. And starting with that shared understanding of, at a very simple level, what are we trying to do here is really important. Creating a shared understanding, as I mentioned, and what you'll see I'll bring up, is like probably the most critical thing to making any strategy successful. But because it means different things to different people, grounding back in this definition is helpful. Because the thing about strategy, and I put this like picture in the background for a reason, is strategy is about taking all of these different like convoluted things, understanding people's expectations from all departments, understanding all elements of a customer journey, for example, for customer marketers and advocacy professionals, and being creative with it to figure out what is going to get you from point A to point B. That whole process, while we think about strategy documents as like, very rigid, maybe black and white things, that is a creative process, because you have to be able to conceptualize what the through line is between what you are doing, what you're trying to achieve and what your bigger vision and picture is. A good strategy really allows you to optimize for efficiency across your whole entire company's efforts. It opens channels for growth. So depending on how you structure it, if things work out, it's going to accelerate your vision and your goals even more. And then a good strategy also provides like this through line to align your team. Strategies, like I was mentioning, of how it can go from the entire company to the rest of the company's orgs and down all the way to the activities, those should all align. And the more that everybody can be aware and grounded in that same foundation, the better we can all work together and achieve the things that we want to achieve. Now, wait a minute, let me make sure I didn't, it looks like I deleted one of my slides about the fundamentals of strategic thinking. So I can walk you through that right now. When you start putting together a strategy, one of the things that I like to go through is how do you have to think in order to be able to do that? As I mentioned here, it's a creative process, and you need to gather information from many different places to inform your strategy to make sure it is optimized to be that through line. An example of this, and I'll go off my bullet points, is analyzing like what the current landscape is and anticipating future trends that come up. If you're coming into an organization as a customer marketing and advocacy professional and they don't have an advocacy program, you're going to go in and analyze what their relationships are with their customers already. What is sparking customers to give that high NPS score? What people within the organization have good relationships with customers, and what makes them so happy that that is a thing that they do. You have to analyze the current landscape and figure out the patterns. And a good way to do this, again, with the information gathering process, is to go and interview those stakeholders. I remember taking this class when I was in college, and it was around information sciences technology. And the professor, it felt like every 5 words was saying the word stakeholder. And I remember being in that class being like, oh, I'm the stakeholder, this stakeholder, that. I'm probably never going to say that word again in my life. I have said the word stakeholder so frequently. And that is because it is such an integral part to designing good strategy, because you have to know who you're designing for. And you also have to know everything about the players that need to be involved to create that plan that you believe and predict is the best case scenario for what you're trying to accomplish. So being able to analyze the landscape, gather information from multiple stakeholders, and then also anticipate challenges and blockers that come up is another piece of this puzzle. That's like the next bullet point that I have. When you look at what you're trying to achieve, what's getting in the way is going to be a big piece that you have to anticipate for. What's blocking things now and what's blocking things in the future. A good example of this, when I was the director of customer marketing and advocacy at a cybersecurity company, they had an advocacy program already started, but a big challenge that they were facing and a blocker was that the majority of their customer advocates were in the APAC region. So they were from a different part of the world. They spoke a different language. And in corporate headquarters, the folks who were running the advocacy program didn't have access to those customers because language was a barrier, but also they didn't have buy-in from the sales team over there who had the closest relationship with those customers and were protective of those customers because they protected the relationship so much. And there was a lot of elements to that because it's different culturally in different regions within the Asia Pacific region. So looking on paper, this company has an advocacy program, they have customer advocates, but there's a big blocker because those advocates aren't accessible. And in fact, they are being pulled away from the actual advocacy team, the advocacy program, the experience that we had set out to deliver. Anticipating those challenges and identifying those blockers is another piece. And then understanding how, the balance between innovation and execution. this is a piece to be aware of, because when you're creating, you're looking at all of these things, and then you have to document that into a plan that you propose and that you follow through on. There's going to be really creative, innovative things that you do. If your company is asking you to create a customer advocacy program, within that, you are going to maybe get specific in what your customer advocates should be named, what their onboarding experience looks like. But you have to balance between documenting that all up front and then executing that strategy, and what pieces of the puzzle should be documented thoroughly as opposed to should be built along the way, so that you can make a balance and not live within strategy without trial and error and executing these things. And that is why I really recommend using a strategy framework. Over here on the, I look at this on the right side of the slide, I have an example of a structure that I use. That's my go-to strategy framework. In whatever it is that I am creating, whether it's my entire company's business plan and strategy for Cyber Collective, whether it's our strategy for our workshop series that's going to happen this quarter, I believe that these are the details necessary to effectively communicate it to another stakeholder. Now, this is still pretty thorough because we have like more than 9 bullet points here, right? And that's another thing with strategy, where you have to balance that thoroughness with simplicity in order to really enable other people around it. That being said, the core of any strategy framework that you use needs to set the case for the purpose. Why is this even being created? What are we trying to accomplish through that? The next piece is that you need to get really clear when you say what you're trying to accomplish through that. You need to get tangible. You need to set metrics of success to know if what you're working towards or what you're trying to learn has happened or not. Otherwise, you are going to throw out of balance, right, that innovation and execution. And then the next piece that is really important that, isn't often, I think people don't often prioritize in certain strategy development, et cetera, is the stakeholders that you need involved and what their responsibilities are. There are different models for, team collaboration and responsibility when you're setting up a project. I'm not sure if anybody on here has ever heard of the RACI model before. And that is like a collaboration framework to assign people who are participating in a project or an ongoing program and help them understand who's responsible for actually executing on something, who's accountable for if something was successful or not, who's consulted on something to get their feedback, and then who's informed and just told what's happening. It's really helpful to have a common framework and section for that, because a strategy is going to involve many people. You can have a plan and a strategy for yourself in your department of one, but as somebody mentioned earlier before we pulled up these slides, that doesn't really matter because you need people to be involved, even if you are a department of one. And so you need to help them understand that at the very least, they need to know what's going on. The next piece that I want to call out is the details. And this comes down to what I mentioned about like how deep do you want to communicate what the customer advocacy program's onboarding process is, what the brand experience of it. All of those things could fall under this section, and you can get as detailed as you want to be, but it's important to have that documented. So when you need people to participate or understand what you're doing, there's no question to where they can find it and what information they would need. Timeline is also a big piece of this as well, because every strategy, I believe, that is set up should be set up like an experiment. And this is where, in my role now, which I can share more stories about, sometimes we get tripped up depending on what we're doing, because our business plan, our whole entire business plan will have multiple strategies within that, because we have a different strategy every year to achieve and accelerate the impact that we want to achieve. We still have core things that we do, but a strategy is going to exist and be an experiment and help us evolve over time to become better and better at what we set out to do. And then the last piece that is important to include in any framework, which goes back with setting stakeholder expectations, responsibilities, is what your processes are going to be, how you are going to collaborate so that people know how they need to participate to get these things done. Even if you are a department of one, right? And your job is to do the execution, there's still going to be places where people can find updates on your work. There's still going to be places where, you present perhaps to the whole entire company at like the monthly team call or whatever it is. This is where people can stay informed. And then if you are working with other stakeholders, say across like the customer experience team to pull you into a customer story, or the content team to write the story, there has to be an agreement set between how you need people to participate, and then you need to get tangible in how you're expecting them to participate so that it's not open-ended. I see some questions or some more chats. Yes. Responsible, accountable, consultant, informed. Awesome. I'm so glad that that's like been helpful for people. It's really changed the game, and in my own experience as well. And then I want to talk about this part, which is something that came up in the beginning around rallying people around your strategy and your plan, helping them understand. These are where these like leadership techniques come in. And to me, it really requires something that I like to call finesse, okay? In order to get people bought in and help them understand, you have to build in those like ways that they can be accountable and informed to even knowing what those are. And you have to balance consistently sharing what that plan is and that plan is unwavering with meeting people where they're at and spending time to enable them and understand why this is so critical and important. And what's interesting about this, and I can go so deep on these topics as you can imagine, what's interesting about this, in other departments, you have marketing psychology for how you reach people and engage people. You have sales psychology and how you close people to buy your product. This is 100% psychology too. Because similar to how you would be going through and like selling a product, you are asking people, or you are going through the same motion for this. You are trying to get people to understand that knowing your strategy is important for them, that them participating in that strategy is urgent for them, that them keeping it top of mind in what their day-to-day work is will make or break their success as well, and what all of our shared goals and visions are. So these tips jump into like, we're going to get into even more specifics on what works and what doesn't in another slide as I walk through examples. But I believe that the number one thing that you can do here that can set you up for success is to have that framework accessible to people, easily understood by people, and to not waver on that framework. And that's why it's really helpful over time if you we did this at one of my former companies, if the company sets an agreed upon structure that every single department uses whenever they need to create a strategy, create a project plan, a knowledge wiki where people can access and find everybody's different like documentations, all of that. That's really helpful because then people are already halfway there in understanding what they're even looking at, why they're looking at it, and how that anything anybody does ladders back to a company's OKRs. That doesn't always exist. And so if that doesn't exist, you can be a leader in that and create that for the way that people experience your work and your strategy. But it has to be available because then people can be accountable to knowing it. And when it starts to become more top of mind for them, they can go and find it and learn from it and also share and amplify it for you. Now, it's not just about the plan living in your own shareable Google Drive. You have to do enablement efforts. So again, similar to a sales enablement strategy, you're enabling everybody around this strategy yourself. And that is going to look like figuring out where you're going to communicate it to. You're going to have meetings with people who need to be involved, and then presenting these things at company town halls, at sales team meetings, at offsites, et cetera, trying to slide into those agendas so that these things can be visible in other ways is really helpful to you, continuing to enable people around these topics. And the number one way you can get somebody to want to pay attention and resonate is for them to understand why it is so important for them to care. And that's going to be different for each stakeholder, but it's still going to matter for each stakeholder. And there's a way to understand what people's top priorities are and how this aligns with them. And I'm sure you all, especially being in your roles, these have been conversations you've been having around going to a CX team member as opposed to going to a sales team member and helping them understand why they need to participate. And that's something we can definitely get into more detail too. And then lastly, this is, I mentioned this in the beginning, but not only do you need to have that clear, organized plan accessible, you have to have clear communication and collaboration channels, because you need that to enable people, like we mentioned, setting expectations, setting up meetings, showing up on common team meetings. But what's going to happen when you set up a strategy and you start to execute that plan is that you need to be able to understand how it is progressing and then own that strategy in order to and make a decision on necessary pivots that come up depending on how it's progressing. And an example of this is, say I set up a customer marketing or a customer advocacy program. This is our program we're running. This is a strategy of how it works. This is how we plan to get people in. This is the processes that we do with the sales team, the CX team, etc. And our goal is to get to 100 advocates by the end of the year. Say what we're doing in the first quarter, we have a specific way that we're working with the sales team or CX team to bring in customers into the program. And say we do not bring in at least 25 advocates for that quarter. At some point, depending on the timeline of your strategy, you have to make decisions on, okay, well, why is this not working? What is this blocker? Do we need to address this, or are we okay with running this experiment a little longer to then learn from it? If I'm running a year-long strategy and I am tracking the progress of it along the way, I don't want to be in a situation where I don't achieve like 25 advocates per quarter. I'm not having this successful drip, because at the end of the year, when I have to report to my boss if I got 100 advocates or not, I don't want to be rushing it within the last month of the year to do that. And I also know that that's likely because of a problem within the landscape that I maybe don't see, or it's a new problem depending on what we're creating, and I have to go address that. So there are layers to this, but as somebody who runs a strategy, it's living and breathing, and it's creative, and it's interpersonal, and it's exciting, and you have the ability to grow with it as well. You just have to be able to know what parts are non-negotiable, which is the structure of the framework, what parts are the bridges where you're communicating to others, and then what parts are the iterative piece, the innovative pieces, the creative pieces that you own that you can continue to play around with as you develop and run with your strategies. So I just want to share some lessons that I have learned, because my brain, and I find this pretty typical in a lot of customer marketing and advocacy professionals too, because we're so in tune with the customer journey. Our brains do jump to strategy. We jump to, cool, this is a problem. I know that we can get from point A to point B. This is how we could go there. But I just want to share some lessons and recommendations that I've learned. I'm going to start with the don't do this piece. Out of talking about the fundamentals of strategic thinking, how you can create a framework, how you can lead people towards executing this and seeing success, you have to be very careful of not swimming in strategy and pushing yourselves to learn from experiments. And it's very easy to get stuck in strategy, because just like we even said in this conversation, you can create the strategy for your whole advocacy program. Then there's a strategy for how you're engaging with the sales teams. There's different layers to this, and having a common, again, framework for how you structure the work that you do is helpful. But it's very easy to keep communicating, and spending your time on communicating as opposed to execution and just showing how these things work. And showing people that that is non-negotiable, that doing the work is non-negotiable. You can only spend so much time on helping them understand until they have to meet you halfway and then do the work. Another thing is that, say things are slow going. You implement enablement for a sales team, you implement a new process, you're trying to bring in advocates, and things aren't working. I mentioned before on the last slide that you do have that ability to pivot, and you should look out for those moments where you can continue to optimize, but you do still have to give things a fair go. It's like running a survey and reporting on what the survey says, but the timeline was like within 24 hours and you did it over 4th of July or something. You have to give it a good go to be able to learn from the experiment. And so creating and using that framework in the beginning, creating that timeline so you can define what's a good experiment or not, and thinking in experiments is going to help mitigate that. And then the next piece is not fully enabling people on the shared pan. I just mentioned that you can't spend all of your time trying to get people to understand without executing. But what I'm speaking to here is there's a difference between, giving everybody everything they need to understand, and then moving from that to holding them accountable to participating. You can have a whole enablement plan in rolling out your strategy. This is like things I've done when I created customer advocacy programs from scratch. A part of the launch of that program has to come with educating people on it, a lot at first, and then continuously to keep it top of mind. But once you give everybody everything that they need, once they hear it in a presentation, once they have access to the document, once they have access to a Loom video where you walk through it, it's their responsibility to make sure that they're watching it. You don't always have to meet with people one-on-one, even though we naturally do. But they also need to go understand it. And with that, there's this energy that happens where it's like, this is a part of your job. This is a part of your work. This is important for your bottom line. This is a responsibility that you have to continue. So it's part of it with the psychology. And then the things that I really recommend, again, I can't push my framework agenda enough. Frameworks are going to look different depending on what works for you, what works for your company and your immediate people around you, what's best practice for what you're working towards, the different information you need. I can't give you a cut and dry one. I can only give you what has consistently worked best for me. And we have to there's going to be nuances depending on the people in your inner immediate circle you have to convince. Next is distribute responsibility. Yeah.
Kaylee,
Yeah.
I just want to interrupt and ask if anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts so far in about what we're talking about here. Anyone? Okay. Yeah, I want to say I like the idea of this framework and working through it and the enablement aspect. I think there's so much that we have to do to enable the other teams. You call this a framework for your strategy. I often build what I call a roadmap for working with different teams internally when I first build my strategy for community or advocacy. And I will go through and I'll have all these conversations with other teams and then build out, okay, in the first 3 months, I'm going to work with these 3 teams to start that exchange of value for giving them some value so that I can then get their participation and what it looks like over the next year. And I think that aligns really well with what you're talking about here.
Yeah, I love that, the roadmap piece, because it shows people where you're starting and where you want to go, which is a piece, which is an important element to any strategy that you do.
Yeah, it is. And, I'm sure I know Melissa DiBernardo. I know you've worked in here in CMA for a while, so you probably have some thoughts on strategy and stuff. So feel free to jump in and share and ask questions because we learn even more when we do that.
You bet.
Okay, go ahead, Kaylee.
Oh, I mean, that was pretty much it. After that, it was just like a Q&A section. So I think, yeah, we can get into more discussion and kind of hearing what's worked for people. Tips of being proactive and reactive. I think that that's a really good question. Um, where it depends on, I find, like the org's culture as well. I like to be proactive with that roadmap, knowing what my plan is, to have a foundational thing that I can point back to. But when you're able to be reactive with things that happen, you're so ready when you have that foundational thing to jump in and use that opportunity to create and go back to like that through line vision that you have. So I guess in like that scenario of what I'm describing, in order to be reactive effectively, being proactive to have that structure, strategy, et cetera, is like how my mind jumps to. But I'd be interested if there's like a specific scenario that you have.
That's okay, Melissa. You don't have to plan for when Mary's going to just call you out. Did you have additional questions on that, Erin, about proactive and reactive?
Hi. I think yeah, I'm just thinking maybe with regard to prioritization, I think it does just when there's those last minute requests. I'm specifically thinking of when you're asked by other teams, hey, we need a customer speaker for this. Um, and just I don't know. Any ideas on how you kind of weigh the push and pull of like, okay, there's a
Oh
customer
yeah.
speaker that they need for this immediate event. You were maybe kind of still nurturing that relationship and trying to save them for any other kind of collateral, a case study, a video testimonial, a larger speaking engagement, but just curious if you had any thoughts on how to balance the,
Yeah,
hey, this
mitigate that.
strategy and here's kind of this last minute request coming through the pipe. I don't know if anybody else deals with that, but we
Yeah.
certainly.
Man, flashback, the one of the most like the scenario that I jumped to that I experienced with that before, the company where I was telling you all about the how most of their advocates lived in the APAC region. There was this like big PR push that they wanted to do, that they decided to do within a month. And we needed at least 5 customer executives to be going public on record so that we could feature them in Forbes, et cetera, about their endorsement for the company. And it's like, you're like, wow, my conversion rate is real low. So now within a month, you want me to be able to go and have people from all regions. Like, it's just like, it was a tricky thing. So I think that's a good example of where you're put in situations of where people need immediate things, and you have to balance meeting their needs with rerouting them back to the longer game plan in order to fix these problems long term. In those scenarios, especially for the things that I faced, I still like met needs, and I use that as an opportunity to educate on the longer game and what the processes were in play to support that. Especially when it was with executives who were saying, coming to the customer marketing advocacy department, being like, where's our customer quotes, stories, etc. I would also say that creating clear processes has really helped, and doing the stakeholder tour in the beginning of the year of what's on your calendar that you know you're going to want to work with customers on, or have quotes about, or need speakers for, like sales kickoff. You can get to a point where you can have long-term visibility, and then you can have ways and like what's called like SLAs, but you can have like agreements with people. If you need to submit and request a customer speaker, I need at least 1 month to close them and be able to provide the customer speaker. So it's, you can only do so much, especially as reactive things come up. But having that base, it just kind of like, it makes you not like flailing and being like in service to everybody's demands. It helps people shepherd their demands into something that's going to support them towards like the long-term process or the long-term thing you're building towards, which is that you can get customer quotes from CEOs within a month to be, fully public and featured on Forbes. It's a nurturing thing.
I think that's a really good point, using that moment when the ask comes in, because usually I think we go to, okay, scramble and try to figure out how to make it happen. But even just taking a moment to do that re-education of like, okay, but in the future, here's what we're building towards, and we want to get to that point. It's really hard for us to do that right now. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's just, yeah, great insight. Thank you, Callie.
And helping
I
them
have
understand the trade-offs. Like this is their immediate need, but isn't there thing that they're always holding you accountable to, that they're always talking about, et cetera, all of these other things. And then, like you said, you're nurturing that other customer. Okay, just know these are the trade-offs. You won't be able to use this customer again for another few months, those sorts of things. But I think somebody was about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I have done a lot of that re-education myself. I try to remind myself, whenever someone, if we're doing something in marketing, you have to see a message, what is it, 7 times before you're going to take action. I have to remind myself that if I'm teaching sales how to approach me for references or quotes or things like that, or even marketing and other teams, that I have to re-educate them. I have to keep turning that into a habit so that they know what to do. And I think Val Geisler a couple of years ago did a call with us where she was talking about that too. Like if they come to you and they say, well, what kind of quotes do we have about XYZ topic? She'd say, well, I know we have this XYZ and here's our link to the portal or whatever it was where you can find all of these assets. And for me, one, I think it's been easier to have some kind of like if it's a link or something like that, I'll make it into a short code on my computer keyboard so I can just type ABC space and the link will pop up, or turn it into a bit.ly link so that it's easy enough for those people to remember. Because when they're constantly coming to you, you get that opportunity to re-educate them. And I always think in my head, keep it simple, stupid, because if I make it difficult for somebody, they're just going to keep coming back to me and making it more difficult for me. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mary. Really good points.
Stephanie, you tend to live on optimism.
When you said that you re-educate the 7 times, I'm like, here, I've educated you. Now do your thing. And then I have to remember that that's just optimism. That isn't likely to happen. I
Very.
had a question that may be slightly off topic, but it kind of in my brain goes with what we're talking about. Do you all own the advocacy relationship, or do you have your internal folks own that relationship piece? So when we're talking about customer stories or quotes or testimonials, is it something, are all of those relationships with the customers relationships that you all have built, or do you look towards your sales, customer success, whoever?
From the community's point of view, for like if you're in Slack and places like that, I will say that it is either way. It depends who the account managers are, who the customer success managers are, and basically how the company has set it up. But I'll let other people here answer so that you have more.
I'm at a B2B SaaS organization, and we primarily interface with the customers directly. We source a lot of customer champions through sales, through CSMs, through the community space, but then I would say um, we own those relationships.
Yeah,
And
and in my
what is your
experience,
title?
oops, I'm sorry, Mary.
Oh, sorry. I was just asking, Erin, what is your title? What's your team?
I'm senior customer marketing manager, and we're the customer marketing team. And I'm at Workiva B2B SaaS for audit and financial reporting professionals.
Okay, thank you. Sheila?
Yeah, and what I was just going to add is that I think, initially, especially when joining an organization, you're really leveraging sales and customer success all the time for those entrees. But then, I mean, my goal has always been I need to own those relationships myself. So, you're kind of building that reputation so that those individuals feel comfortable with you interacting. And so there's just that freedom that suddenly comes from, oh, great, I have this really strong reputation with my internal teams. So now I can leverage the relationships that I've been building with the customer base, through them. And I mean, that feels so essential for, like when Erin was talking about the last minute kind of thing, and trying to make those trade-offs of they might want this customer, but actually, someone else that might be able to hit some of those needs that they have. And, maybe you can pull in this one. But I think if you're always going through, one of those other teams, it just slows everything down. And I mean, we need to own those relationships. I really do think so.
Yeah, I like to have the relationship as well. Like I tend to want to build some kind of community effort, not necessarily a full out community, but maybe like customer roundtables or something like that, where I'm bringing customers together and I can start building that relationship myself. So I'm not always having to go to CSM or sales and asking them to nominate people or things like that. But I've seen several people in the community that have had to build up to that. So coming into an organization where no, you 100% have to come through me as a CSM. And I think the issue there is trust, because they've probably been burned before, either at another company or, with somebody that has been in a different position before, and, really trying to work on that trust so that they feel like they're part of it. And I've always felt that sales enablement is a really good team to work with to help you kind of figure out the best ways to go about doing that, even with customer success, because they can often be doing some sales work as well.
Thanks for all your responses.
Yeah, let's see. And Melissa says it depends on if customers have a high touch CSM or a lower touch. We find as long as a customer has a familiar face, name and face, they are responsive. So whether it's us or CSMs. And Sheila says communication is key with your internal stakeholders once you have your own relationships. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I ask because I agree that I would like to have the relationships with these folks, and some of the sales and customers, mainly sales, is very reluctant to. I'm not going to make a commission. It's not like I'm trying to make a sale and keep them out of it, but they're reluctant to give up that relationship building.
Are you working on maybe building out like a references program right now?
Yes.
Yeah. That's very common, is getting sales to be open to that and sharing those resources. That's one of the reasons that I'll do some kind of community effort, just because now instead of it being, oh, she just wants all of my people and she's going to use them for everybody else, there's something really valuable in it for the customers themselves. But it depends on what your organization will let you do. Callie, do you have any thoughts you want to share on these things?
Yeah, I was wondering if, and again, not every company or not everybody can have the same opportunity. But when we were building out the references programs, internal incentives played a big part in it. So it was, and that's what sales teams are also used to, like bonuses, competitions, et cetera, et cetera. So we ran out like a few different kind of internal campaigns of whoever can get like the 10 references first, like wins like $1,000 gift card or something. And so if you have an advocacy budget within your department, you can make the case to do that. You can also make the case to, like a higher level person about why it should be in their budget. Okay, as a sales leader, you are always coming to me to get references to close. You're always worried about not having enough references. Why don't you just give a little bit of your incentive budget and see what we can do here and just do like a trial? It doesn't have to be that big, but I found that in that environment specifically, not everything's the same, but in that environment specifically, people ran on the money exchange internally. And they also wanted to provide that to their customers too. So just like communicating the give get. I really like your approach, Mary, about the community tables, and it's through more of a like it's through just like relationship building as opposed to being transactional. But that was the one in that scenario, the type of culture the company had, the type of customer, that was what they were used to. So it was like a win to go with what was common first and guide people towards those like sustainable solutions, which I think is like the community building, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, it does. It definitely depends on your organization. It depends on the people like CMOs, the head of sales, and things like that, because you get a new head of sales and everything's just in an uproar. So it really depends. But yeah, the community's always here. And if you want to ask questions on Slack, you can do that as well. We
Well, and
probably
one,
have a
oh my gosh, Mary, I'm killing you today.
No, no, you're good. Go. Go ahead.
And this is like kind of returning to something else, but I think Callie mentioned it. And when we were talking about re-educating and constantly educating, internal teams, I think the Loom videos are so essential. And I mean, I don't know how many of those I have created on, whether it's how to request a reference and, all of the pieces and the parts and what the timeline is and, the lead time and all of that, whether it's, speakers, customer references to close the sales deal. I just think those are really handy. And then having them available, I used to put them in Confluence where anyone all over the globe, could find them easily. And you're just continuing to point people and refreshing those kinds of things, I think have been very helpful, certainly in my past.
Yeah, I love that. And I think like the piece about the accountability that comes in, and that's why that challenge I mentioned with the internal incentive worked well, because there's a now relationship between the sales and their boss, the sales teams and their boss about whether they are participating or not. And so while you can have that library available, like setting the expectation from the director of like that team or whatever, saying everybody has to watch those videos is really helpful too. But I love Loom. It's so helpful, especially for you to be able to be more reactive or manage your time better. It's helpful.
Yeah, that's something I have not thought of in the past is taking some of that enablement and making it more accessible by putting it in a space for people to come in and look at when they need to find something. Smart. Thank you, Sheila.
Yeah, and I do think, and you can add some personality. So it's like, like it's not just a boring doc that's sitting there that someone's going to have to go through. It's almost like you can kind of make those little things enjoyable so they don't mind going to them. And, again, refreshing them frequently and, just, adding whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yeah, like little like Easter eggs and stuff, like Taylor Swift and sprinkle throughout.
That's a great point. Yeah, I'll have to share that with Amanda Peacock. She is a huge Swiftie.
Did you say that it was Loop or Loom what platform are you talking? Loop?
Loom.
Loom. Oh, Loom. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a short video platform. So you make short videos that are screen recordings and send them with a quick link. Okay, well, we are at the end of our call for the week. Thank you all for coming. Callie, thank you so much for hopping on and sharing this with us today. This is going to be very useful for a lot of people. I've only had one other call that we really talked about this strategy, prioritization, and all of that. And I've been sending people back to that call over and over for the last year plus. Now I have another one, so that's really exciting. And yeah, next week we are going to have Jenny Asaba get on and talk about the intersection of community and advocacy and how people are doing that today and just some ideas. She's always got such great ideas on community and advocacy. And Go ahead and ask questions in Slack. And Kaylee, thank you for hopping on with us. Feel free to come back anytime. We'd love to hear from you more.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And everybody, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if there's any scenarios you want to bounce off or anything like that. I'm here. So I'm looking forward to the next meetup. Thank you so much, Mary. Great
Yeah.
meeting everyone.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Stephanie, and nice to see you, Erin and Melissa, and talk Sheila, and see you all next week. And Kendra, yes. All right. Have a
Yeah,
great
thank
week.
you.
Bye.